Welcome, Don D from Saskatchewan. We're super excited to have you here today. We met you on our Zoom meeting about 9-10 months ago, and you've always been kind of a shining star in that meeting. And so we're excited to have you here today. I know that you have a very cool story. Well, it's cool to me for sure. But yeah, welcome.
Amazing. Thanks, Tommy. That means a lot. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, Don, it's Bill here. Welcome. Really happy to see you and to have you on our podcast. I remember when you first came into the meeting, I was like, who is this chick? I'm like, fuck, I've been to Saskatchewan. I've never heard any recovery like that out there. And that's not to say there's no recovery in Saskatchewan. That's just my judgment, right? But your message was so powerful and so strong, and the way that you would always reach out to the women, I was like, wow, I'm really happy. I hope she keeps coming. And you have, right? And so we've gotten to know each other. Tommy and I have gotten to know you through Zoom only, but it's been an experience connecting on the different levels of recovery and of spirituality. And so really, really happy to have you here and have the chat with you today.
So I guess we'll just get started. So what brought you to recovery?
What brought me to recovery? Well, I was a raging, suicidal, and violent teenage alcoholic, and I'd spent my whole life trying to manage and trying to get places and to acquire things and to just measure up. And my whole life, everything that drove me was measuring up. And I finally came to a place of, the emotional bottoms. I just had enough of them. And so I was 29 years old and I decided I was going to get sober. And it was interesting that I knew I was an alcoholic from the time I was about 14 or 15 years old. And it took me that long to actually want to make some change in my life. But I just didn't know when or how I could ever give up my solution. But there was something in me from a very young age that always knew that I had to quit drinking one day and that I would. And I don't know, that's really like, where does that even come from? But I hit 29 and I got dry and I went to the gym and I tried to be awesome and climb ladders and get promotions and get the right men and all of these things. And then I hit more emotional bottoms of frustration and anger because I was trying so damn hard and nothing was working to find happiness and sobriety at the same time. But what actually really drove me in on the heart level to come into AA was after 2 years of 2 consecutive dry spells. I started to have some deeper questions for myself, and I imagined myself laying on my deathbed actually at 70 or 80 years old. And I was thinking back over my life in this thought of like, what kind of life do I want to see for myself? And I realized I potentially had 2/3 of my life left. And I knew I couldn't go on like this for another 2/3. The next 2/3 could not be this type of suffering. I'd had enough suffering in the first third of my life that was enough for a lifetime. And I was just ready to, find out what was out there for me and to start living in some sort of solution.
So Don, you had mentioned hitting the emotional bottom and, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it brought me into the book. We're part of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's kind of the design for living that I know you follow, and it's your foundation. It's also Tommy and I's foundation for our design for living. In the Bill's story, it talks about Bill forging the weapon that would one day turn in its flight and cut him to ribbons. So it's the boomerang, and there was alcohol and it was drugs for me. And it did give me some type of relief, and it gave me a sense of purpose, and it did do something for me for a long time. But eventually it turned in its flight and it started cutting me to ribbons. And also what I've noticed about my emotions or my defective character through my recovery as I get older, certain aspects of my personality, or my fractured pieces of the personality, or how I cope with life, how I used to cope with life. Let's say anger, for example. It used to work for me. It actually expanded my life. It protected me, and it opened up some parts of my life. But as I've gotten older and in my recovery, that has turned in its flight and cut me to ribbons. And I can only look at that when I've really had enough of it. And also lust was another one that, I used to get a lot of value out of it. It had payoffs. They were selfish, self-centered payoffs, but they did a lot for me, and they expanded my world for a while. But then it turns in its flight, and it starts cutting me to ribbons. And these coping mechanisms that I used to use that served me, as I get older, they stop serving me. So when you say emotional bottom, maybe before you started the journey to like really expand spirituality, did you have some of these defects that did work for you, but then they turned in their flight and started not being acceptable to you, and you really had to look at them? And if so, like what kind of things?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, it's almost everything really, but the things that come to mind for me right now is attention and approval seeking. I mean, that was a survival mechanism that got me by for many years, and that's something that still comes up for me today. But that validation, but also things like just using people to get as a means to get where I wanted to get to. I mean, that was just at the root of my selfishness and self-centeredness. And many things like passive aggressiveness was one thing that would come up. And that was me because I didn't know how to feel my anger properly. I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to assert myself. So it came out at the seams, and it came out passive aggressively. And if you've ever, kind of lived or worked with a passive aggressive person, you know that they're almost the worst kind that you can come across. But I mean, all kinds of things. And I honestly, I mix up what was really survival and what was personality and what was this and that. But, denial was a huge tool of mine for the longest time. I just felt like I was I believed I was hiding in plain sight. And as long as I just keep denying things, then nobody's really going to know what's up with me, and nobody can see me. It's like hiding behind my finger and just holding my finger up, and just everywhere they look at me, I put my finger up there and they can't see me behind it, right? So so many different things, but really throughout my recovery, it's just been now just coming up on 9 years, I've come to realize that like every single aspect of myself is on the table, and it's up for negotiation with God. And when it gets painful enough, because it's, slicing me up, as you said, that's when I become willing to actually do something and to relinquish it and to let it go. But oftentimes I have to go through many cycles of picking up that old tool as a coping mechanism or a way to get by before I get to the place of surrender where it's like, okay, God, I'm ready. Like, you can take it. I'm done.
Yeah, I think that we do develop like these defense mechanisms just to keep us protected. And it's like our ego is like actually trying to protect us from harm. And, I'm just coming to realize how much how not in touch with my emotions I was through this process. And we spoke earlier, and we kind of talked about like the misperception of the teachings in the big book, because we're always about doing something and action. And, so whenever I felt an emotion, it was like, what do I need to do? And, but there's also a part that says, we ask God what he would have us be. And I never understood that part. I didn't understand how to just be and how to, feel this stuff in my life. And the thing is about the program is like, it takes you certain places, but not everything works a certain way forever. Like we have to continue to grow and expand and learn more things about ourselves. But I was just so focused on the fear, the resentment, the selfishness, dishonesty, which I worked on when I was ready, right? And then it kind of just brings you to a deeper level the more you hang around and the more you work at it. So it's like the vehicle to a higher power, and the higher power starts to reveal more about yourself. And what I'm noticing is that only when you're ready and only when you're willing, because I noticed because I relapsed, like I came in the program 12 years ago, but I kept relapsing. And thing is, I was really just going to the meetings and doing some prayers, but I wasn't really in this with complete abandon. And I think the complete abandon is very important. And now in my recovery, it's more, the abandon is more of a internal abandon. Whereas before it was like everything around me in my life is screwed up. So I was kind of abandoning all my outside life to God. And now I'm coming to terms with, now it's an internal abandon into this, and more is being revealed. So I know that you had an experience with other spiritual practices in addition to the big book. You want to tell us a little bit about how that all unraveled or availed itself?
Well, yoga's been a big part of my life because I understand, alcohol is but a symptom. So I've checked into a lot of different types of spirituality as I continue to grow along spiritual lines. And the reason that I continue to grow along spiritual lines wasn't just because of intellectual interest and I wanted to sound smart and whatever, but it was literally that I was pushed to that place of complete abandon, where like backed into the corner by self. And like, it's basically like stay in this corner and die, or like frickin' grow and let go of whatever the old ideas are that you're hanging on to, Don, that are blocking you. And so, I'd have to emerge from the corner, and I didn't, unfortunately, always find my answers in the big book. I didn't always find like a lot of the stuff, it's kind of hidden in a lot of subtleties, and it's written in a bit of a different language than what my heart understands sometimes. And so I would go on these kind of, sojourns spiritually, and I'd check out a lot of different things and a lot of different ideas. But the funny thing about it is that every single time I'd come back and I would land back in the big book or the 12 and 12, some form of literature, and I'd open it and it would be like in like one line or one paragraph, the exact thing that I was looking for the entire time, but I couldn't see it there. And I know that that's a part of my journey. I thought that, there's something about intellectually knowing something, but then the actual living out of it is a whole different experience. And so, going on those sojourns, I don't think that that's wrong. I think that's actually expanded my horizons in a lot of ways, and it's helped me look at myself through many different lenses and make sense of, broaden my perspective in a lot of ways. But what I have managed to do, because I became entirely convinced that every time I came back to the foundation of our recovery and found myself in these books, that everything that I do out there in the world, I braid it back in with my recovery here. And this is the foundation, like center strand of the braid. And I bring it all back in here and base it off of my understanding that I've been giving of this foundation. And so, yeah, we continue to grow along spiritual lines. And I believe for many, it does take us outside of the program. And AA is it's a great setup for learning how to embrace spirituality, learning how to pray, learning how to like just even access higher principles and how to like hitch our heart and our minds onto those things and learn how to live in a good way and on a day-to-day basis, which I mean, honestly, when you look at the world out there and what's going on out there with people's fear and the addictions and all of the shit that's going down, it's like, although AA and the spiritual world might just be a base foundation, it's like a master's degree for living if you take it out there into the world, which is why I think recovery is the shit and why like it's my everything. It's the foundation of my entire life, and I've just become more and more convinced as time goes on.
That's awesome. You know that I'm a big book thumper, so a lot of when people talk, the words come into my mind and I see the page. And as you were talking, it brought me to a piece of the book, and it was like in the step 4, it talks about in the 12 and 12 that every newcomer or every person in A at some point realizes that his instincts gone astray has been the primary cause of his destructive drinking and failure at life. Unless he is now willing to work hard at the elimination of the worst of these defects, both sobriety and peace of mind will still elude him. This is the part that the faulty foundation of life will have to be torn out and built upon a new bedrock. And as I've gone through recovery, I didn't really understand what that meant. A lot of these words in the book were just black and white, and I read them and they never really sunk in. But over the years, as I've really tried to practice this and change and be better, I think there was a point in my recovery where it was like, this isn't about drinking or drugs because it is a symptom. It's like, how bad do I want to change my life? And then I make a consistent, persistent commitment to change. And as I do that, and I turn to God, because I realized early that I couldn't change without his help. So I had to always ask him for help in these areas of change. I started realizing what that line meant was all of these God-given instincts that he gave me that are necessary for my existence. You know, he wants me to have sex relations. He wants me to be in relationships. He wants me to be secure in who I am and where I live and have a shelter and be able to make money. But we often use these things far outside of their intended purpose. And I need to tear down that faulty foundation because it's built on the foundation of self. So I need to tear that foundation out. But you talked about it, our society is built in the foundation of self. And I really like how you talked about going to other books. I read a book called Power versus Force and Letting Go. It's by David Hawkins. And he describes the levels of consciousness. And he said the world we live in is the world of pride. And the pride is still in the level of force where you go and pry and grab and take for you. But as you rise up above these levels, which is what this program teaches us to do, you get into a place of other concernedness, not self-concernedness. And the real gifts in life start coming through the giving and not always the taking. And so building upon the new bedrock is building upon the new bedrock of our Creator. And our Creator, to me, is love. And following the directions in the book, it actually takes us to the place of other-centeredness. And that's where the gifts for me have really come. Tommy talked about sponsorship off air. I know you sponsor, I sponsor, and it's through the service to other people. And at first it was acts of altruism, because I needed to do the acts of altruism to stay alive. It was a necessity for me, but it was still based in self. And then a little bit down the road, it started releasing a little bit more. And I was doing the acts of altruism because it made me feel good, which is still based in a lot of self. But then as I kept doing this work and practicing this hard work, because a lot of it wasn't fucking easy, a lot of times I get to the place where I am doing some of these things like totally selflessly, and I'm out of the way. And I've learned through my own life that as I live this way for like Creator and others start living for me, and things that I always wanted that I tried to get and force out of life, they start delivering themselves to me. Have you had that experience with your journey at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Where it's you get on the beam, or you get on the highway, the broad highway, and you're in, next thing you know, you're upgraded to a Cadillac and you're just kind of cruising, right? And if I can use God as the car to drive me rather than me driving the car, and if I use my pillars and my sponsor as the guardrails to keep me from running off the road or staying in my lane, I'm fairly good to go. But there's times in recovery too where I've driven right off the side of the cliff on the highway too, right? And ended down, walking walking on a footpath down there. But sometimes that's been absolutely necessary for me to understand where my instincts have taken over. And so what recovery's given me, it's hooked me into the real true purpose of what I live for. And so it's to be of service, of maximum service to my creator and to fellow human beings, rather than maximum service to myself. And so my experience with that is that I see a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this myself. I see a lot of people, especially like new age people in spirituality. They're trying to find something of meaning in their life. They're trying to kind of manifest and build the lives of their dreams, and get in tune with the universal power that is driving this all creation. And maybe there's something for them in it too, and something for all of us. But that's what I see, is people trying to manifest from that place of self, and they're not even close to I guess maybe what the fourth dimension is, or the dimension of where true manifestation can occur, where the universe just starts to give abundantly to you, because as reward or payoff for the hard work and the service that's been done thus far. And so I find that the more and more I sacrifice the aspects of self, and the more and more I just continue to completely align myself with what God wants for me. And I have to do that. Like, it's to the point now where most of the time it's like, there's nothing I want anything more than to be of maximum service to my creator. There's just, you can offer me a BMW, you can offer me $1 million, you can offer me this, you can offer me that, and ask me to sell myself out or sell out God in that. And I know now I can't do it. I have to, there is absolutely no cost on what I've been given that can be bought. So, as long as I stay in that energy and I align in that way, I seem to end up where I need to end up. And sometimes it pisses me off because it doesn't look the way I want it to look or feel the way I want it to feel. But then in a roundabout way, it turns out to be exactly what I needed. And then I'm grateful for that. So it's interesting how it plays out.
And I think about that too, because it has it's kind of like a perfect way to get rid of all the fears and the selfishness, and we start to change our perspective on it. Because all my life I was manifesting fear, worry, anger. So I was surrounded by fear, worry, anger, because that's all I ever thought about. So that's what I was attracting. And then I come into this program and we start to look at those things, and I start to change my perspective on, all that fear and selfishness and all that stuff. And then it's no wonder my life just like rockets into a totally different way of being, because now I'm starting to focus on, compassion and being there for other people, empathy, stuff like this. And that's in the step 11 and the 12 and 12. Bill starts to direct us in meditation to use our imagination and start to broaden our horizon, because we have this like very narrow perspective of the way life needs to be, because it's all pride. I need this and it has to happen by Friday, and I'm going to be happy once I have these things. We start to broaden our horizon into this, you know, in meditation, and start using your imagination for manifesting things like love and compassion. And it tells us to imagine ourselves being useful to other people in meditation. And we start to manifest this, and then people start coming to us needing our help. The other thing is, in the letting go process, there's no better way to let something go and let God do his work than to focus on someone else, because I am completely out of the way at that point. And then all of a sudden, this abundance of love and joy and these things start to happen in my life. And I'm not talking about manifesting material things. Those things just fall into place because I'm not so friggin' have such a tight grip on that stuff that it becomes a need instead of a, you know, my ego is very needy and always wants more. But when I'm focused on helping other people and being of service, that's not something that needs to happen. And that pride, that low vibration starts to slip away. And naturally, I just start attracting things that I really wanted, because my ego tells me I want something, but then my heart really knows what I want. And that's the beauty of this program. And then, you know, in addition to other spiritual practices, I mean, this thing is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, for sure. And I would have never got there just picking up, because I remember high on cocaine, reading The Power of Now, and then talking about how to be in the moment to all my friends high on coke. Like, you know, the information itself, it's useless if it's not applied. And the program of action is perfect for a guy like me, because I have to be doing something. I have to be doing something, especially early in recovery, right?
Well, that's just it too, is that's what I'm of service here for, is to teach people how to apply this stuff to their everyday, the twists and turns of everyday life, right? And it's one thing to learn the text and to memorize it and to, you know, think that, okay, anything that comes up, now I'm prepared because I've got the book, right? But it doesn't actually play out that way. That's why we need people of service to help us learn how to apply what's learned in the book to our lives in our very own unique circumstances and situations sometimes. And so, you know, but then further to your comment, I found too that there's been times in my recovery that, you know, the answer has been, well, the answer all along, be of service, absolutely. But there's also been, but that takes me often outside of myself and outside of some of the deeper feeling states that you were talking about that maybe need to be expressed and acknowledged and felt. So that's why meditation is incredibly important. That's why learning to, you know, even just let my body acclimate to sitting with some of these feeling states that I've been repressing and that need to be released in order for me to continue healing and to like further my recovery and my spiritual awakening. And so I try to find a good balance between, you know, being out there and being of service and, you know, caring for self and honoring self and what I'm going through. Because if I just keep going out there, and it's almost a form of running from myself too. I've done that in recovery where I've just, I was hanging out in step 12 when I needed to be hanging out in step 4, 5, 6, and 7. And, you know, eventually the message in step 12 starts to get pretty shallow, and it starts to get pretty, you know, ineffective when you're not living it out. You know, it starts to fall apart at the seams. And so, you know, I really have to stay attuned to what's going on inside of me so that, you know, I can follow that inner guidance and even sponsor guidance. And I find that early in recovery too, you know, I'm not really going to encourage too many sponsees, especially those who maybe have a lot of trauma or who have a lot of, you know, where like feeling anything, the stress level in them like just sets them off, and they're just like, whoa. I'm not going to encourage them to go and sit in meditation and feel their feelings necessarily. Yeah, damn straight. I'm going to like, go get out of yourself, go outside, go, you know, help somebody. But I was talking to my sponsor about this maybe about a month ago. And the difference is, over time, when we start to learn to kind of stabilize and apply tools, and we can actually move through different feeling states and periods of difficulty, and that, it's a good practice to begin to honor and to look at what's inside and what's the truth there.
So Don, you kind of brought up something else in me to ask you. So, and I don't want to be judgmental. So any listeners that think this is coming from a place of judgment, it's not coming from a place of judgment. It's coming from a place of truth and a firm belief of what I believe. And for me, I've worked with a lot of sponsees. I've been to thousands of meetings, and I like to think of myself as a collector of data. I collect data, and then I discern the data, and I see what works and I see what doesn't work. And I go to a lot of meetings, and a lot of times I hear half the message that we carry, and the half the message that we carry is the mess. Talking a lot about the problems, very little talk about solution. You're frowned upon if you talk about God too much, and people want to hear about the problems and tell me who you are. But what I found most effective is, combining the who am I in the problem with the what happened and what it's like now, and what do I do today. And I really emphasize the big book with my experience, the pain and the growth, and God is a lot in my sharing. And so I guess my question to you is, have you seen, like, in your recovery, have you gotten into areas where you've been in the mess and then wondered why this isn't really working and really struggled through? And then maybe when you found certain types of people or certain types of meeting, you were like, yes, this is what I'm attracted to, and this is what I see that's going to help me. And then you kind of are drawn that way. I see newer people come in, and, not to speak highly about our meeting, people need all kinds of meetings, but our meeting is a solution-based meeting. And I find over the time we've been a meeting, a lot of the people that have come there have actually done really well, and they're not struggling. They're actually implementing the solution. And it just goes to my data collection that when you talk about the solution, you follow these directions, things really, really do change. And God is not a theory. God becomes a working part of these people's lives, even in that first year, and it actually takes them further on in their life. So have you experienced the two sides? I'm going to say it's a little judgmental, but the mess type of meetings and drawn to solution, or do you just see it all as the same?
Yeah, it's a great question. Absolutely. I've seen the two sides for sure. I've experienced the two sides. I've been the two sides. And so that's what keeps me from judging or trying to qualify one better than the other. But I mean, there's one that has real power in it, and that's the solution. And then there's one that has, the problem in it, and that's the mess, right? And so, even in my own recovery, I've been the mess very much because I wasn't implementing the solution. And so, and I was, self-navigating my program. I was going to meetings. I was listening to a bunch of opinions. I was trying to figure things out on my own. My sponsorship maybe wasn't as effective as I needed it to be. They weren't bringing me back to the book. And so I've done a ton of spinning around, just trying to figure out where I'm at. And a lot of where I'm at in my recovery now is a result of that, which I believe is no mistake for me, but it led me back to the literature where I had to figure a lot of shit out myself. And, the beautiful part about your meeting, and when I found it earlier this year, I was in a difficult place of spinning around myself. and the solution was there. And it was a powerfully resonant message that spoke to my soul and my spirit. And it also told me exactly what I needed to do. And for a person who's lost in spinning, that's precisely what we're looking for, right? In a safe environment that's non-judgmental, right? And so sometimes people come in and they're not ready to implement the solution. They want to hang around in victim mentality for a while, or they just want to let the world, push them around and have their way with them a bit more. But many who come in, and what I noticed right away in your fellowship is that there's some really young sobriety, but the level of sharing and comprehension of this program within this group is absolutely top shelf. It's absolutely inspired me. I've had people in the meeting who are 3-4 months sober say things that knock me on my ass at 8 years. And it doesn't really matter how much time you have in, because we're all still able to learn from one another. And so I've been absolutely floored by what you guys are doing, and that's why I've joined the group. That's why I'm honored to be here. I mean, that's why it's absolutely amazing. So there's a lot of power in what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's interesting how it happened. When the lockdown first started 10 months ago, or when COVID first hit, I was restless, irritable, and discontent, basically, because of everything was collapsing. It seemed that way at the time around us, and I just didn't know what to do with myself. And I phoned Bill. We had no idea about video chat at the time. We had no idea about microphones or podcasts or any of this stuff, right? And so I phoned him, and he said, I don't know, dude. Like, there's this thing called Zoom. Check it out and start a meeting. And I said, okay. So I said a prayer, did a meditation, wrote the format, got the code, and it just flowed like we didn't plan anything. This is the thing. We didn't have anything. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know anything about running a meeting. I mean, going to enough meetings, I knew how to chair a meeting, but we didn't know how to start a group or any of that stuff. And it just happened. It just happened, and everybody got some time to themselves. Nobody could work. So everybody was forced to be with themselves for a while. And everybody that came onto that meeting was so receptive because of I believe it was the time in isolation where people had to do this stuff. And then it just started having this ripple effect. And people with 1 month sober were coming in, and then all of a sudden, 2 months later, they were like warp speed program and talking like they had 5 years, basically. And I don't think they were trying to do anything. It was just happening. So, I mean, it was one of those things where just stepping into the unknown and doing what was in front of us. And now the meeting's been going on for 10 months. And it seems like everybody who comes on stays with us because of the results. Because of the results, the direct information on the steps and how to do them, people are actually like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. Because I was the guy that read the big book, not knowing what the fuck they were talking about, doing the little bit that I knew could understand, and doing it once and just letting it go. So I think the message of this is a way of living. Well, I mean, our big book study is the design for living, and that's what it is. It's a design for living. And I don't know. I've seen the ripple effect that this has happened, like especially with the guys that are starting to sponsor that first came in that first period of isolation, and now they're 9-10 months sober, and now they're sponsoring. I think the message is very clear and it's easy to understand once it's explained properly. And I mean, I know very little about the big book, but I know a hell of a lot more than my struggles of 10 years trying to figure it out on my own with the help of Bill and, everybody that's come into my life because of basically this moment in time of this meeting. And, you know, the guys that have been reaching out, it's been a really amazing experience. And we're very happy to have a very strong recovered woman on the meeting, because we need that. Because Bill and I, we just can't possibly really provide that message from the female energy point of view, right? So.
Oh, thanks. That's right on.
Mm.
Yeah, and absolutely. The interpretation that you guys are laying out there of the big book is it's deep and it's profound and it's striking people at the core. And we know when something resonates, it's because it's true.
Mm.
And everybody on this planet knows when something is true. You know, even if they want to deny it, even if they want to whatever, run somewhere, we know when we hear the truth, and that's what's like coming through the airwaves at people. And I do believe like the recovery, the speed of recovery that is moving through this channel is it's unreal. And like you said, like it sounds like people who've been here 3-4 months have 4 or 5 years of recovery, and it's like, my God, like I don't know what I'm witnessing here, but it's absolutely phenomenal. And I'm learning so much from these people coming in. It's just really circled around me, and it's taken me out of that place of just kind of feeling egoically elevated, like I'm the oldest of, you know, or how many years I have sobriety, or how much experience I have, or all of that, because it's just like, holy shit, you know, I continue to learn how much I don't know, and it's absolutely amazing.
So as you've kind of moved through your 8 years, almost 9 years of recovery, have there been any like really like profound milestone moments where you stood at a turning point and you had to do something or another, and I would say you had to do what was easy or you had to do what was hard, and you made the hard decision to do what was hard? Was there any like big moments in your recovery that were like really pretty big turning points?
Yeah, I've had quite a few of those actually. And they, you know, some of them were self-imposed crisis, some of them weren't. But one of them was at 3 years sober, I had my first baby, and I was hit with postpartum depression in a way that, you know, it was kind of like, you know, try to throw a step at that, man. Like it was a force beyond anything that I ever knew. Um, and um, and I didn't realize that I was back in self-reliance. I didn't realize I was back in fear, and it had gripped me, and I was in control again. And so I hit a major surrender point with that finally, and I switched home groups because I wasn't hearing the solution anymore. I was hearing the problem at my home group, and I just started back on track. I got a new sponsor. You know, I did the stuff that I had to do then. And then around 5 years sober, my ambitions went crazy, and I thought it was like all God inspired because I felt God inspired, and amazing things were kind of unfolding and stuff. But I was way like caught in this cycle of overdoing and almost workaholism. But it was like I couldn't say no to anything, and you know, and I literally burnt out. Like it was like my nervous system, like I had the gas and the brake on at the same time. And I literally burnt my system out, and I couldn't get out of bed for about 10 days. And it literally threw me into like a midlife crisis. Like it literally threw me into like a breakdown. And so I had to go off work for months and months. And so like these defects of character, what I'm saying is like ambitions, even like can be fatal, right? Like that's an extreme case. And so I spent months and months, but that kind of breakdown period where I was off work, like that was an immense space being held for me to grow along spiritual lines. And I went on my sojourn once again, and I started just talking to women and talking to people. And it was like every day, all I knew, it was like my personality was erased, and all I knew was like, God, just guide me today. That's all I can ask for. I don't know. And I'd get out of bed and I'd follow my intuition, and I'd go, to this bookstore, and it'd be like, I know I need to get this book, and I'd get the book. And then at the bookstore, I'd see a woman who asked me about the book, and I'd end up in a half-hour conversation with her, and I'd pour out my life to her because I just had and it was just like, I just kept pouring everything out. And in that way, it was like I became this open book. I had nothing to hide, and all of these magical like helpers and people came into my world. And then there's been other periods of this, but this past year, I mean, COVID hit me really hard. I thought I was all serene, and it was like, I fully trust what God is unfolding with the courses of nature. And yeah, these systems are going to fall, and yes, we're going to have real change in the world. And but then, the conditions of living it messed me up, having my kids here, and we were all just like grating on each other, and the tension and all of it became too much, and I felt so trapped. Apparently it set off in me some sort of complex trauma episode of PTSD, which I didn't even know I had. But it spiraled me on this whole huge mental health thing. And this past year in 2020, now, like, I hit the bottom, and I tried to throw a step at that. I tried to, step forward. I tried to do. It's like, man, sometimes we're getting down into the roots, and it's just like, I felt like I was in this tide pool of just kind of spinning around, and all I could do was cling on to recovery, cling on to my community, cling on to my pillars, and know that, it's not the soap that gets the clothes clean, it's the agitation that gets the clothes clean. And so I'm just here for the ride, God, and you show me where you're taking me. And so I'd hit these complete crazy surrender points. And I don't know if everybody has stuff like that in recovery, these massive dark nights, or if they, most people are fairly happy because they apply the program properly and they just sail on. And, every once in a while they have some emotions, but they get through that. And, for me, it's not been my spiritual experience. It's like, I'm getting what I asked for. Right. But what I thought I was asking for was complete happiness and smooth sailing, really, is what I thought. But it's like, this is the breakdown of my ego. This is the breakdown and the exposing and the getting down to the bedrock of the real wounding that's underneath all of the symptoms. And so, what I discovered this year is a huge wound, just around worthiness and needing validation, because I just essentially didn't feel loved. So for me, the deeper I go and the more I've been put into these places, the more simple it actually gets to understand what is really driving me. And it's a need for love. It's a need for validation. It's a need for things that I didn't necessarily get in life and that I'm still driven by.
I haven't met anybody who just works the perfect program and has a few emotions and that's all. I don't think that's the deal. It always seems to be, if we had to deal with everything that we had to deal with at once in the beginning, I think we probably all hang ourselves. And we're only prepared for so much as we go. And then it gets hard for a reason, because if it doesn't get hard, we don't really look at anything. When everything's going great, why would I want to look at fear or, deep wounded emotions? Everything's great. There's no purpose. But as we go, like I said earlier, I can only handle so much at one time. And then I get periods of basically God's grace where everything just seems to flow and everything. But the thing is with the steps, it keeps you prepared. It keeps you prepared for what's coming. And I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom, but there's certain things that I just don't understand about myself that keep coming up, and I get to work on them today. And it's uncomfortable. I wouldn't say like I'm in like a ton of pain sometimes. But like it always varies. I mean, it never looks the same. It's different levels of pain, I suppose, and then different levels of readiness as well, right? It's like when I'm open, it's like, okay, I know exactly where I need to go, and I would just kind of let it happen. And sometimes it comes through a book or a teacher or whatever. But as long as I'm willing to, because it's like my subconscious or my body or wherever it's coming from is going to show me what it is, and then it's up to me to do the work on it. And it's up to me to give this to a higher power, because I don't really know what to do with it yet, and do my best to let that go so that I can be shown what to do with it. When I try and figure it out between my ego and my disease, I can make a mess of things. Because I want everything to be healed by Friday at 3:00, right? Every time.
Mm-hmm.
And I want spiritual growth and all these great things to happen like as soon as possible. Problem is my ego wants to figure out as fast as possible so that I can get on with the business of being self-satisfied, basically.
So let me talk about what that is, though. What that is, and I realized this year, like, holy shit, am I ever guilty of this? Like, that's a spiritual bypass, right? We're trying to avoid the work. We're trying to end up at the solution. The book told me where I need to end up at, but why can't I just jump there and get there and not feel these feelings? I already know where I got to get to, God. Why do I have to go through the jungle? Like, don't. And that was my form of resistance of what's really happening. And so through recovery, sometimes better than others, when those spells of darkness come, I've learned to just stop resisting them and to actually kind of embrace them. And so, but I mean, obviously within the directions and the parameters of the program, I'm not going to go try to do this all myself. I need my people, I need my pillars, I need my meetings, I need all of it. I need God. But yeah, the spiritual bypass was just my way of trying to resist what's happening and hide. And so it's much easier to surrender when I stop like gripping onto, the cliff wall or the side of the banks or the whatever, and just allow the process to show me. Knowing on the other side is the gift. Knowing on the other side, like when I go into this dark cavern and I shine light on what's there and I look at and I start to excavate and I do what's required, I'm going to come out of here with a pocket full of jewels. Mm-hmm. And those jewels is what I'm handing out in step 12. And that's what I have to offer the world. And those jewels are going to align with my best talents. They're going to align with my best gifts that I have to offer the world. And something else is going to be born out of me eventually, out of every time I go and I excavate. Mm-hmm. Right. So that knowing is what keeps me willing to keep going in, to keep digging deeper, to keep going to God, and repeat, repeat, and there's been times this year, I mean, honestly, I believe there's a difference between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. And some people are gifted with a spiritual experience. And earlier on in recovery, I did have an experience. And so if I didn't have an experience like that to have got me through this year, I was at the point where it was like, God, I don't want to come back. If there is such a thing as reincarnation, if there is such a thing as, like, this is it for me. Like, I'm going to be done because I can't do this anymore. And, I don't know if everybody goes to this depth of pain and insanity and all of it in their recovery and healing. But and I don't know if I've done more than other people or whatever it is, but for whatever reason, God wants me to go through some crazy stuff. And this is really nothing compared to some of the stuff some of my friends in recovery, like I've had people with friends who've had children die in recovery. I've had friends who've like been blown up in like and burnt up in explosions, or like had water skiing accidents where they like are now in a wheelchair for their lives. My sponsor was, you know, diagnosed with cancer a few months ago. She's the walking epitome of emotional sobriety through the entire frickin' thing, right? So I can only trust that I'm on some sort of path that's taking me to face whatever life throws my way. And hopefully it's not any bigger than it is now, but I seem to be honing in on trauma. I seem to be honing in on shadow work. And I think that that's kind of along the lines of where God wants me to take my recovery, and to maybe attract and help people along those lines.
You guys bring up a really good point, and it's almost like using spirituality as the coping mechanism. And like we use all these different coping mechanisms that will turn in their flight and cut us to ribbons at some point. But when we first get in here, like the program has it's almost like a dogma attachment to it, because it's, you know, we've been known or looked at as a cult and all these kinds of things, and people have a judgment about what this is, because there's some simple rules that we have to follow on this path. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Yeah, there's a path here and there's some rules, and it's almost tied to a bit of dogma. But I think when you're new, it has to be that way. And maybe spirituality is a crutch to like push some of that stuff away, at least for the time being. It has to be that way. But eventually, as you say, these spiritual experiences that we have along the way that change our viewpoint in our perception of life and our perception of the pain and whatever it is, it changes from like a dogma. You could call this the program, or you can call it spiritual disciplines. Basically, it's a lot of spiritual disciplines about doing certain things and uncovering certain things, but we put a label on it and we call it the program of whatever, NA, CA, AA, but then people have judgment because everything has labels. But as you keep using spirituality as like the coping mechanism and you kind of push things aside, like Tommy said about the step 10, we ask God to remove it at once. Okay, I feel this, let's get it out of the way because I don't want to feel it. But eventually, as you stay sober, you start understanding that these things organically need to come out. I think a huge problem that we encounter is after that like pink cloud year, and a lot of the messages in the room is like, okay, you got a year, you're on your way, great. But the problem is you're not on your way. You're on your way to a relapse because the real issue you've never dealt with, because you use spirituality as the coping mechanism. So that's why it's so important to carry the real message, because the real message keeps you here. And a lot of this shit, like you guys have discussed today, doesn't reveal itself till down the road. And pulling the roots out, sometimes, like Tommy said, if you were to pull these roots out at first, we'd be jumping off of bridges. But over time, the roots, when you pull out a root out of the ground, let's say it's a dandelion or a thistle bush, you got to like slowly pull on that root or else you break it. And what happens? That weed grows back again. So you gotta take the time, and some of the time happens over years. More is always revealed. So I think like that's a huge part of the message I think that we're talking about today is things take time. And having God is just a theory, it's not really enough. God has to be working in your life, and the directions in the big book allow God to work in your life through day by day. Understanding the directions in the big book is really important to get to this point where, you know, the dogma is not a dogma anymore. And the real things that need to come up that actually free you from the bondage of self, the insecurities, the defects of character, or the fractured pieces of the personality, which are actually the identifiers of my brokenness, unwholeness, these things start getting healed, and I start becoming more whole, and I start feeling more free. And like you said, everyone's journey is different, and you're on your journey with some of your pain and experiences. But when you look at the facts, you can look at people that have been in way tougher situations managing it because they're centered in something greater than themselves. And I think that's the biggest message in our program, is trying to have him run our lives. And that changes over time too, to a point where, like today, I'm scared shitless to run my life because I see the breadcrumbs, and every time I'm in pain, there's usually a decision based on self out of my fractured pieces of my personality, which act out as defects of character. And so, I really liked what you guys were just talking there. And I know we're getting kind of close to the end of our chat today, but I wanted to ask you quickly about family. I know you got kids and you have a family, and like, I know you're like our first woman on our podcast, and a lot of women have kids and they've been single moms, and some of them are married and in partnerships. And I hear a lot of women talk about the struggles of being a parent in recovery. And do you got any advice for the women in recovery on how to navigate that?
Oh, yeah, great question. Well, for me, recovery around parenting has been about letting myself down on the whole host of disillusionments that I was holding on to around what it was all about, and what kind of mother I was supposed to be, and what constitutes a good mother, and what constitutes a good family life, and what good kids are, and what those behaviors look like, and essentially letting go of old ideas. And it's been a very hard emotional process for me to even want to let go of some of those old ideals, because that's what they are. They're ideals that have been set for me outside of myself by society, that I've adopted and I'm trying to run and live by, but they're not allowing me to be the human being that I am. And so I hold myself to this subhuman standard, and it eventually wears me down, and it starts killing me from the inside out, right? Because I will never live up to my own expectations. Plus the fear of, like, I had all these ideas about how I'm passing my trauma on to my kids, and whatever. And at the end of the day, what it's all come down to is, Dawn, like, practice these principles in all your affairs the best that you can. And there's something in the 12 and 12, and maybe I'll read it right here, but it actually fits a lot with this, and it's step 12. And it says, like most people, we have found that we can take our big lumps as they come, but also, like others, we often discover a greater challenge in the lesser and more continuous problems of life. Our answer is in still more spiritual development. Only by this means can we improve our chances for really happy and useful living. And as we grow spiritually, we find that our old attitudes toward our instincts need to undergo drastic revisions. Our desires for emotional security and wealth, for personal prestige and power, for romance, and for family satisfactions, all these have to be tempered and redirected. We have learned that the satisfaction of instincts cannot be the sole end and aim of our lives. If we place instincts first, we have got the cart before the horse. We shall be pulled backward into disillusionment. But when we are willing to place spiritual growth first, then and only then do we have a real chance. And this has been one of the hardest areas of my life that I've had to let go of the disillusionments that were ruling me. But again, I back myself in the corner with self, and eventually, it's die in the corner, smothered by self, suffocated, or like live on, Dawn, become willing to let go of whatever this is you're clinging to, and let God have it. And that is a process that happens in spite of me. It's the simplest little decision that I can make at my breaking point. But for me, I'm often taken to my breaking point. And that's my will, that's my pride, that's all of it, right? And it's my expectations and how I want things to be. versus how they really are. So, I mean, I'm a person who tries to create alternate realities for myself. And so I've tried very hard to fix my family of origin situation in my current family life. And I failed miserably at that because this disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it's way more powerful than me. So if I think I'm ending the cycle of addiction in my family, or I've been shown like, no, Dawn, this is God's plan. This isn't yours. And so it's like, stop driving the bus, stop using your muscle, stop trying to control outcomes, stop trying to play the higher power of other little people in your world or whatever, right? And so I've needed serious outside help for that, including our sister recovery programs. But at the end of the day, I understand that it's that deep instinctual fear, self-centered fear, that is driven within me, that is causing all of the confusion and chaos in my world. And I can know that intellectually all along the way, but there's been times where it's like I was powerless over my inability to stop myself. And so, I think God had to kind of put me around in the meat tenderizer for a while until I deflated enough to just be willing to, like, I don't have any more muscle to use here. And that's when I become willing, So sometimes becoming willing, it's just like flipping a switch. It's like, yeah, that's easy. Of course I want God to do that. Take it for sure, right? And there's other times where it's like, it's been very intellectual, where it's like, of course it makes sense to let God run my family life and my children's lives. But the living out and the acting out of that often comes from a very different place. And I'm not always in integrity. Sometimes my heart and my mind aren't in alignment, and my instincts aren't into alignment. And so I feel like sometimes coming into those alignments is really the toughest part of it. But there's things that we can do around emotional regulation. There's things that we can do around, like, grounding ourselves and breath, that calms the nervous system. It stops reaction. There's having a daily spiritual practice. There's meditation, prayer, reading the spiritual things, whatever, maybe yoga is your thing or something else. There's all kinds of things that we can do, but it's really about keeping the focus on ourselves, getting well ourselves. And then, like you guys have been talking about all along, like, just letting God be the undercarriage for our life, and just, have all things flow within that, rather than just me using my muscle of self being the undercarriage. And I'm seeing some newer sponsees who are just falling into line, and it's just starting to work. All they've had to do is open their mind, set their intention on what they want. They want this way of life. They want the psychic change. They want something that's a solution that's different. And then they become willing to take the very basic action steps we're asking them to do on a daily basis, and they commence to get results. Like, holy shit, who knew? Right? So it's amazing how I thought option A and option B were the only possible outcomes of my family life, or of any situation in my life, really. But then I let go, and God shows up with option C, and I never even fathomed option C, and it's way better than what I ever thought. And it's like, holy shit, I become convinced again. I become entirely convinced. And so now I'm at the point where, like, I don't know, sometimes I'm afraid to run my own life, but it's like, I don't even want to do it. Like, I'm so willing. I want God to run my life on every little aspect, right? So I get some pretty deep and intense prayers to set my heart and my mind on where God wants me to be every day. And those seem to be holding me in a good state right now. And eventually what needs to come into my practice will be revealed to me later as I continue to grow. So yeah.
Cool. Well, amazing stuff. I mean, we could probably go on for another 2 hours, but we do try to keep it around an hour, and that's just how we roll. Awesome having you on the channel. I knew this was better than I expected, of course. Usually that's the way things go when you just let it happen. Yeah, I just want to show my gratitude for you and what you're doing, because I know you're doing a lot of good in the world. Do you want to let people know where they can find you? You don't have to, but if you want people to be aware of you and be able to get in touch with you, yeah, your website or your whatever your contacts are, you can let it happen.
And what are you doing?
Oh yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Well, I started a coaching company a couple of years ago, and it's centered on coaching, energy healing, and yoga for trauma release and inner child healing is a big part of it too. A lot of it is recovery based though, because that's the basis of my life. So if anyone's interested in contacting me, they can get a hold of me at 306-241-1642, or go to my website, www.truth-inside.ca. I'm also on Facebook and on Instagram at Truth Inside Coaching.
Awesome.
And we are brother and sister in Indigenous culture. And I know that you lean heavily into trying to help Indigenous women in many ways. Can you expand a little bit on that? I know some of our listeners are Indigenous, and I know, our Indigenous First Nations people there's a lot of trauma, a lot of addictions, and a lot of need for people like you and myself and Tommy. It doesn't matter what race we are, right? But I just want to really amplify that a little bit. What are you doing with our culture?
Yeah, so like I said, yoga has been a big part of my journey, and so just through the natural course of God building with me and doing with me, I co-founded an organization called the Saskatchewan Indigenous Yoga Association, and we train Indigenous yoga instructors to bring yoga out to Indigenous people and communities. And yoga is an incredibly healing practice. There's a myriad of benefits to it: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. But a lot of the emphasis is on trauma release from the body, healing, and spiritual awakening, and getting attuned to the truth inside, really, of who we are and what we are, and shedding away the social constructs that we've internalized that have made us all spiritually sick inside, and inspiring that within each and every one of these instructors to bring that message out into our communities and into the world. And so that's a labor of love, and we're only really just getting started, but it's absolutely amazing, the attraction power of that organization and what's happening. So I look forward to continuing to working on that. So if anyone's interested in checking anything out like that, you can find us at www.siya.ca, and we're currently offering free community yoga practices on Zoom every Sunday night. And they're taught by our 2020 graduate class of Indigenous instructors. So if you want to check it out, feel free and sign up. You can sign up on the website.
Awesome. That's amazing, Dawn. So yeah, you can also find me at forsythgroup.coach on Facebook and Instagram. And then website is forsythgroup.ca. And Bill, where are you at?
Bill, where I'm at. So just a couple of things on what I'm doing. I'm going to start doing Indigenous influencer podcast starting somewhere around the end of January. Those will be up on my Spotify, billward.life, probably my YouTube at billward.life, and as well as the recovery stuff that I'm doing. But I'm going to really focus on some First Nations aspects here. But yeah, all my podcasts and all my stuff is on billward.life on all the different platforms. Or we also have our email for this type of thing. It's fosdfl@gmail.com. And you can get a hold of Tommy and I and ask us anything, and we can send you links or answer questions. And I've just had a great time today, buddy.
Yeah, me too. Thanks again, Don.
Me too. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Don.